Every professional motorbike rider uses an incredibly simple but insanely important technique to achieve insane speeds around a race circuit. Let me explain. Have a quick look at this video here. This might look completely normal, a rider going through a corner. It's the same with this one, and even this one. There doesn't seem to be anything noticeable. Well, in all honesty, it's actually pretty difficult to see this technique in action with these videos. So to help visualize it better, have a look at these two videos side by side instead. Notice a difference between the two? Have a look at the rider on the left versus the rider on the right. He's able to turn a lot faster. But why? Well, believe it or not, everything is the same between these two riders apart from their steering style. The rider on the right is using the wrong steering technique. He's simply leaning in the direction that he wants to go. The rider on the left, however, is using the right technique. And if you've ever ridden a pedal bike before, you've actually done this exact same technique, maybe without even knowing it. It's called counter steering. So why do pro riders use this technique in MotoGP, World Superbikes, or any other motorbike series? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but first I need to explain a few things to help the rest of the video make sense. First off, how have you managed to do counter steering without even realizing it if you've ridden a pedal bike before? Well, in all honesty, it's pretty straightforward. Let's quickly take a look at a motorbike. They can weigh upwards of 200 kilos and some even more. And when you're moving forwards on a motorbike, they generate quite a lot of momentum. Because of this, they need a bigger force to change direction. Now let's look at a pedal bike. These weigh maybe 8 to 10 kilos, almost nothing compared to a motorbike. And because they're so much lighter, it takes much less effort to change their direction, which can make it really hard to notice counter steering on a pedal bike. Most of the time, you're simply able to lean in the direction that you want to go. There's almost no other force that needs to be applied. Okay, so we understand why you don't notice counter steering on a pedal bike. But the whole principle of counter steering is really unintuitive when you look at it. In short, to go left, you need to steer right, and to go right, you need to steer left. How on earth does that actually make any sense? Well, there's some really clever physics behind it, and I'm going to go through those right now, so stay with me. No matter how hard a rider tries, they simply won't be able to get round a corner if the combined mass of the rider and the bike isn't leaning over in that particular corner. It's impossible. If a professional rider isn't leaning into a corner, they'll briefly defy the nature of humans not being able to fly and then very quickly undefy that nature when they smash into the ground. The bike will literally throw itself out of the corner along with the rider. So why does this happen? Well, whenever a rider leans into a corner, there's a centripetal force generated between the tyres and the road. And this force generates a torque around the centre of gravity of the bike. And this force wants to tip the bike out of the corner. If a rider isn't leaning enough into a corner, that centripetal force overcomes gravity and throws the bike out of the corner. That's actually a really important point to remember, and we're going to come back to it in a second, so keep that in mind. But if a rider leans into a corner, their centre of gravity moves to the inside of that corner. And this generates another opposing force. In short, the lean angle force cancels out the force trying to tip the bike away from the corner. And for every corner, there's a perfect balance of the two. Depending on how fast the rider's going or how tight the corner is, if they find that perfect balance, they'll go through the corner nice and smooth. So the rider has a part to play in cornering, obviously. But so does the bike, or more importantly, the wheels of the bike. Motorbike wheels have both forward and angular momentum. It basically means they'll try to keep going at the same speed and at the same angle unless they're forced to change. So with this in mind, we already know a pro rider simply won't lean into the corner. The momentum generated by the bike is simply too strong and leaning isn't enough. Remember that bit that I said was really important a minute or so ago about the bike wanting to tip out of the corner? Well, pro riders use this tipping out force to their advantage. Say a rider's going into a right-hand corner. They'll push on the right handlebar to counter steer left for a brief moment. But because the rider's upright, it makes the bike unstable. And that centripetal force wants to tip the bike away from the direction of the front wheel. In this scenario, the bike's wheel is pointing to the left. So the bike is going to want to start leaning to the right. The harder the rider pushes the handlebar, the more the bike leans in the opposite direction. And if, for example, the rider's going through a left-hand corner, they'll simply do the opposite. They'll counter-steer to the right. It's important to know as well that once they've counter-steered and they've started leaning into the corner, they will have to release that pressure on the handlebar to keep the bike stable through the corner. Now obviously there's a limit to this. Tyres only provide a certain amount of grip, and if a rider pushes past that limit, they'll have an accident. Most commonly a low side, but high sides are also possible if the bike grips up at the wrong time. It just means they've pushed the bike beyond the limits that it's capable of. Either one is obviously pretty bad. So with all this in mind, if we take a few videos from pro riders and slow them down, can you notice one thing in common with these bikes? Or more specifically, the tyres. Whatever the corner direction is, the front wheel is turning in the opposite direction. This is what counter steering is. Speeding videos up makes it much harder to notice, but now that you've seen it, it's really hard to unsee it. Now that we know what counter steering is and how it works, we still need to understand why it's so important for pro riders to use it on the track. As we've said, a pro rider can't just lean into a corner. They need to use counter steering to destabilize the bike. This makes it enter into a corner faster, and this means faster lap times. A faster lap time means a happy rider and a happy team. And depending on the skill of the rider and their riding style, they can be really aggressive on that counter steering to initiate the lean into the corner, giving them even more time. It's also much safer. If something happens up ahead on track and a rider needs to take avoiding action, they need to counter steer away from the issue. If you didn't counter steer, even if a rider reacted as quickly as they physically could, chances are they wouldn't be able to move out of the way quick enough, which could result in an even bigger accident. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out these videos here. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.